Hello everybody! I'm assuming that you've already made a ball object, and you've already made a program that uses the ball object to do exactly what we've done before. So it just has the ball bounce around the screen, but now you're using your object methods. So you're telling the ball to accelerate, you're telling the ball to move, you're asking the ball, are you hitting the right side of the screen? Like that. Okay, so I want to show you in advance what it is that we're going to make over the course of the next two videos. We're going to put together what you've learned about objects with what you know from before about arrays. So now, when you click and drag, it will leave a whole bunch of ball objects behind you that all bounce. Or, if we wanted to, we could make it do something a little bit different. Instead, we could make it so that whenever you click, it creates a fountain of ball objects that spray up from a particular spot on the screen and then fall away again. Before we can do any of that, though, I want to review a really important concept from arrays. You need to know all the regular stuff, like how do you make an array, how do you loop over an array. But I want to use the idea of having an array that is not completely full. It's only going to be partially full, and over time we'll add new things into it. So let's do a quick example that has nothing to do with graphics first, but don't skip the example. You should actually do it because this is critical to understand if you're going to understand the next part. In this simple example, we're just going to have an array of strings, and it's going to be a to-do list. So, buy the eggs, sail to Florida, that kind of thing. And we're going to ask the user to type in 6 different things to do, and after the user types in each thing, we're going to display the whole list. So let's get started, and then I'll show you what's the really, really important concept. So if I wanted to make an int array, I'd do int bracket bracket. For a string array, I'll do string bracket bracket. I'm going to call my array list, and then to actually make this just makes a variable that could be holding an array, but I haven't actually made the array yet. To make the array, I have to set it to be equal to a new string array. And then inside these brackets, the number I put tells me how many things I want to be in the array. So this is a new array that will hold 6 strings. All right, so I'm going to loop 6 times. So I starts at 0, it goes up to... Before you would have said 6, I'd actually like you to change this. So instead of saying I is less than 6, let's say I is less than list.length. List.length is exactly what it sounds like. It is the length of this. It's the length of the list. So it's 6. The reason why we'd want to do this instead of just saying 6 is later on maybe I want to change the length of the array. I might want to make it 10. And if you change it up here, it will just magically work down there in the loop. All right, so far so good. So now let's ask the user to type something. So I'll say string response equals j option pane, show input dialog. What's something you want to do? And now I need to do 2 things. I need to save their response into my list, and then I want to display the whole list. Okay, well, if you remember from before, the way that we can display an array is we'll use a print line statement, but you can't just put the name of the list. I can't just say print line list, because this is going to display the memory location where the list is. It doesn't actually tell me what's inside the list. So a shortcut is you can say arrays.toString. And the way you should think about that is that word toString, we're taking an array and we're converting it to a string. That's why it's called toString. So this takes the list, it makes it into a string so that we can display it with println. All right, so let's just actually look and see what this looks like before we do anything. So if I just run the program the way that it is right now, it displays 6 nulls in a row. Null is a special term in Java that means more or less like nothing, although it has a special, more technical meaning that we'll get into later. Okay, so the reason our array is full of nulls is because we haven't put anything into it yet. That's what happens when you have an array of elements and you haven't put anything in there. Okay, now for the critical concept. So here's a picture of what our list looks like. So this is the array with 6 elements. Remember that the locations start at 0, so if it's got 6 things in it, you're starting at 0. The location of the last thing is 5. And to start out with, they're all null. So if I'm going to be adding things to this list one at a time, I need to remember where's the next spot in the array that I can save something into. So that we're going to make a variable called next location. And the purpose of this variable is to point at the location number where the next empty spot is for us to save something into. So in pseudocode, we're going to loop 6 times. We've actually done this already. We're going to ask the user to type, not a name, they're going to type something to do. We've done that part. Then we're going to take that variable and we're going to store it in location, next location. So we might store it in 0 or in 1 or in 2, but we're going to store it at whatever location is inside this variable. So for example, the first time through, next location is 0. Let's say I type go to store. So then I'd want to store it in next location, so that's 0. So it would save go to store. But then I'd want to update my next location because this location 0, I already saved something there. So I'd want to have it point at location 1 because that's the next available spot for me to save something. So then as the last step in the algorithm, we're going to add 1 to next location so that I can move to the last thing. Okay, this actually contains a small bug, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So at the very top, let's create an int called next location that we'll set to be 0. And I don't want to print this anymore. So we're looping 6 times. We're asking what something you want to do. Now we're going to save the response into the list. So if I wanted to save into location 0, I would say list bracket 0. In our case, I want to say list bracket next location. And what I want to save into there is their response. And then the last step was I need to add 1 to next location. And then I'm going to display the whole list so far. So let's see what this looks like as I run it. So here I'm running it. It says what's something you want to do? Sail to Florida. So now you can see sail to Florida got saved into location 0, and all the rest are null. And so now we've gone back to the top of the loop. So now what's something else I want to do? I want to eat a dumpling. Okay. And now in my list, sail to Florida, and then in location 1, eat a dumpling. So you can keep doing more and more of these. Buy a puppy, paint the side of my boat pink, and so on. And each thing gets saved as the next thing in the list. All right, so that's the concept. Why don't you go ahead and type this in and make sure that you can do it yourself, and then I'll tell you what this has to do with that ball fountain that I showed you at the beginning of the video. So here's the ball fountain. In order to have so many objects moving at the same time, we need one ball object for everything that gets displayed here. So that's lots and lots of variables. So before, you were making the variables one at a time. You were doing something like this. At the top, you were saying ball B. And if you wanted to have more than one ball object, you would have another one, and another one, and another one. You'd have lots of ball objects. The problem with that is for our ball fountain, maybe we really want like literally several hundred of them. So you wouldn't want to type in several hundred. That's the whole reason to have an array. So what we're going to do, just like the last program that we just wrote, where you had an array with 6 different strings, for our new program, we're going to have an array called ball list, but instead of storing strings, each element of the array stores a ball object. So if you make an array that has 300 elements, like length 300, you could store up to 300 ball objects. And what's nice about that is every single frame of your animation then, you can visit every single spot in the array and you can tell this object, you should move yourself and display yourself. And then you go to the next one, you say this ball, you should move yourself and display yourself, and so on. So it lets you control all of the objects all at once. All right, so we're getting there. So the key here is, instead of making a string array, we're going to make an array that stores objects. But the basic idea is the same. We're going to have a next location that points at the next empty spot in the list. And instead of storing a string in there, we're going to create a new ball object by running the constructor the way that you're used to. And then we're going to save that ball object into the next location in the ball list. So here's that pattern I was just saying. Let's pretend that we've already created 4 ball objects and put them inside the array. So here I've put little variables inside the circles to indicate that each ball object has variables inside it. It's got an x and a y and an x speed and a y speed and some other things. Okay, so that means next location, that variable is pointing at 4 because I've already put 4 in there. So location 4 here is the next empty location that I would be saving another ball into if I was going to make it. Okay, so every single loop that I want to display and move the ball objects, I need to visit every single one of these and tell it to do whatever I want it to do. So this is the master pattern right here. We're going to visit every location, starting at 0 and ending at next location. And then we're going to get the ball object out of that location. So whatever location we're looking at, we're going to take this object and remove it from the array. And then we're going to tell it to do stuff, like move itself and display itself. And if we do that for every single object in the list, now we're doing it for all of the objects, and that's what's going to get you a very complicated program where lots of things are moving all at once. Because they're actually not moving all at once. You're actually telling things to move one at a time. It only appears that they're moving all at once. All right, so you've got a normal loop where you're starting at 0 and you're going up by 1 every time, and you're ending at next location, which is the last spot where it's empty. Or sorry, the first spot where it's empty. Then this right here, ball list I. Remember, this is how you get something out of an array. So ball list 0 would be whatever's inside location 0. Ball list 4 is whatever's inside location 4. So if I say ball list I, that means every single time through the loop, I is going to be different. So that means I'm going to be getting a different ball object. And I'm taking that ball object from the array and I'm saving it into this temporary variable. This is just sort of like a holder so that I can put that ball somewhere to tell it to do stuff. So I'm calling it current ball because it's the ball that I am currently doing things to. And then once you've gotten the ball out of the list, then you can tell it to move, you can tell it to display itself, you can run any of the methods that you've made for your ball object. All right, let's go ahead and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this example where I just have a single ball object. I'm creating the ball at 300, 300 with a size of 60. And then inside the draw, I'm telling it to accelerate down and to move itself. And then I'm seeing if it's hitting the right-hand side of the screen, if it's hitting the left, all that kind of thing. So I'm going to make a copy of this whole file. So over here on the left, I'm going to copy it and paste it. I'm going to call this ball fountain example. And now I've opened it. All right, so here we go. So instead of having a single ball object, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to delete that. What I actually want to do is I want to make a whole array of ball objects. So instead of a string array like this, and instead of so this would be like list, and instead of an int array, num list, I want to make an array of ball objects. So string is the data type, int is the data type, ball is the data type. And you know it's a data type because you've got this class called ball, where you're declaring what does it mean to be a ball object. So that's the reason why you're able to use this as a data type. So ball bracket bracket means an array of ball objects, and I'm going to call this ball list. Okay, and I'm going to delete these other arrays that I don't need. Okay, so this has just made a variable that could be holding an array, but I've actually got to create the array itself. So I've just deleted that stuff in setup, and now I'll say ball list equals new ball, and then however many spots I want my array to have. So this is 300. I think a good idea here is at the very top, let's make an integer called maxnum, which we'll set to 300. And this is going to be like the maximum number of objects. And so then I'll put maxnum in here. Okay, so I'm making a list that's got now 300 spots to save objects. All right, I'm not going to create any objects to start with. The list is just going to be empty. Okay, so, come on. So down here inside draw, I'm going to put the code that will let me add new ball objects. Oh, I forgot the most important thing. We've got to make a variable called next location that starts at 0. And this is the next free location to save an object into. All right, so remember the way that you tell if the mouse is being pressed down is by the special variable mouse pressed. So if mouse pressed is true, what do I want to do? I want to create a new ball object. Then I want to save it into the next free location in my list. And then I want to add 1 to the next location variable. So I'm just writing these down as pseudocode so that you can kind of think about it. All right, so create a new ball object. Well, I'm going to make a temporary variable to store my ball object, ball B. And then the way you make a new object of any kind is by running its constructor. So I'll say new ball, because that's the ball constructor. I've forgotten already what the inputs to the ball constructor are supposed to be. So if you ever forget how to use your own methods, you can just go and check. So here in the ball class, I see my constructor is expecting 3 inputs, x, y, and diameter. So back here, I'll give it an x coordinate of 300, a y coordinate of 500, and a diameter of 20. All right, so I've created a new ball object. Now I need to save that inside the next free location in my list. So let's see, my list is called ball list. If I wanted to save it into location 0, I could put a 0 here. But the problem is, well, and then I could put an equals sign, and whatever's on the right-hand side is what would get saved. So I'm trying to save B, because B is what is currently holding that ball object. Okay, so the problem with this is every single time this runs, I'm going to save it only ever inside location 0. But the whole point is, after I've saved one ball in there, now I want to save the next ball into the next location. So that's why I'm using the next location variable. Next location starts at 0, so I'm going to save B into 0. But then if I say next location equals next location plus 1, now next location will be equal to 1, and the next time I come through here and I create another ball object, that ball is going to get saved into location 1 in my array, and so on. All right, so I'm going to delete these comments so that the code's a little more condensed. All right, this still has the same bug that I mentioned before and I said we weren't going to talk about yet. I'm just going to let us run into it because that's like a pretty real world experience, and then we can think about why is it happening. All right, so let's add a comment up here. Create new ball objects whenever the mouse is pressed. But now I need to actually move and display all existing ball objects, because otherwise nothing would happen, right? So if only I had a ball that was called B, this code right here, I know it's doing what I want it to do. It's accelerating the ball downwards and it's moving the ball and all that other stuff. The problem is I want all these lines of code, I want to do all of these for every single ball that exists. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a loop that loops through the array of ball objects. So int I equals 0. I is going to be less than next location, just like our last example. I equals I plus 1. And I'll open the loop here, and I'm going to close the loop way down here at the bottom. All right, so it still doesn't know what B is, because I don't actually have a ball variable yet. So this is what I had displayed. Where is my display? Oh, I closed it. Okay, well, this is what I had displayed before. I need to get the ball at location I out of the list so that we can do stuff with it. So I'm going to create a temporary variable called current ball, and I'm going to assign to that variable ball list location I. Because remember, location I starts at 0 and goes up by 1 every time. So every single time I go through this loop, I'm getting a new ball out of the list, saving it to this variable. Now I can tell that ball to accelerate down. I can tell that ball to move itself. I can tell that ball that if it's hitting the right-hand side, I don't want to set a random position. I want it to reverse its x speed. I can tell the current ball if it's hitting the left-hand side, then current ball should reverse its x speed. If it's hitting the... I'm going to remove this entirely. I'm not going to do anything if it hits the top or the bottom. I'm just going to let it keep going. And then I'm going to have current ball draw itself. Okay, cool. So let's run it and see what it looks like. Okay, well that's not very exciting. The balls seem like they're just falling straight down. So what I'm thinking is maybe I need to give them a speed, right? When I ran it, it seems like it's working. It's creating the objects. It's applying the gravity. The problem is I want them to be kind of flying upwards. So right here where I first create them, ball B, before I actually save the ball into the list, I'm going to give it a speed. I'll say b.setSpeed. And my setSpeed method takes an x speed and a y speed as input. So I'm going to make my x speed be random. So rand speed. And my y speed is going to be -10. Negative because a negative y speed actually moves the ball up. Okay, rand speed, that's not magic. That's a variable I haven't made yet. So let's make it here. It's going to be a float. And I want a random number between like -3 and +3. So I'll have math.random times 7. And then... or let's do times 6 minus 3. All right, cool. So now let's go ahead and run it. Aha! There, that's looking nice. Okay, so here I am. I'm playing. It's so much fun. Oh, what was that? What has just happened? So it says there is an exception. Let's make it larger and see what it says. It says array index out of bounds exception. And this number 300 is the location that it's trying to access that's actually out of bounds. If you click right here, this is where it's actually happening. So it's happening right on this line. Let me explain what's going on here. This is the bug I was talking about. So what happened was I was running the program. And I was adding more and more objects to my list, but my list isn't infinitely long. Remember, there's only 300 spots in my list. So eventually, I filled every single location with a ball object, up until the last one, which is 299. So next location was equal to 299. I created the ball object. Well, this isn't creating it, but I created the ball object and I saved it in there. And then I added 1 to next location. So now next location is pointed at 300, but 300 is off the edge of the array. There is no location 300. So then the next time when I tried to save a ball object into location 300, that's what caused the error, because I was trying to access a location that doesn't exist. Okay, so what's the solution here? The solution is we just need to put in an if statement that checks to make sure that we're not at the end of the list. So if mouse pressed is true, we only want to create a new ball object if the next free location isn't off the edge of the list yet. So if the next location is smaller than 300, then I know it's safe to make a new one. And I'm going to wrap all that stuff with the if statement brackets. Except remember, I don't really want to use 300. I made this nice maxnum variable. So as long as my next location is smaller than the end of the list, in fact, we don't even need to say maxnum. We could actually use ball list. Let's say ball list.length. So as long as my next location is less than the length of the ball list, then it's safe to create another ball and save it in the next location. If my next location is not less than the length of the list, then it'll just skip that, so it just won't do anything. So let's watch that happen. So here I am, I'm creating more objects, and I'm still holding the mouse button down. Right now it's still being held down, but I stopped creating objects because I got to location 300, and you can hear me clicking and it's not doing anything. Okay. If you want to make the other version, you don't need to create the ball at 300, 500. You can create it at mouse x, mouse y, so that way the ball will get created where the mouse is. And I think you probably want to give it a y speed of 0 and an x speed of 0 so that it will just kind of fall from wherever your mouse is, like this. And if you want to turn back on the bouncing, you can turn back on the bouncing. Oh, that's so much fun. Oh my god. Okay. Hopefully this has opened up a whole new world, and this is what's going to let us make actually really fun games where like you can have a lot of different objects, you could be shooting things, you could have lots of different things to avoid, you could have lots of different things to collect if you want to collect things. So it's a very powerful technique. I want to say that there's actually a slightly better list to use than an array. It's something that you don't know about yet. It's called an array list. It's sort of like an array, but it's sort of like a flexible, more powerful, more dynamic version of an array. And that's what we're actually going to study next. But because you don't know about that yet, and I still wanted you to be able to do this, we're going to use the arrays that we know. All right, good luck.